Hello everyone and welcome to Prehistory, a Traveler's Guide. We're your hosts, Dakota, Scott, and Greg. And tonight we are covering the sauropod Jobaria. The dimensions of this dinosaur was 21.3 meters or 70 feet long, with a weight of about 22.2 metric tons, or 25 short. Classification. The phylogenetic relationships of Jobaria are uncertain. It has been interpreted as either a basal macrocoronian or as a non-neosauropod eusauropod basal to the neosauropod clade. Its paleobiology, like other sauropods, Jobaria was a herbivore and probably used its long neck for procuring food by either browsing in trees like Brachiosaurus or grazing ground plants like Diplodocus. It may have been able to rear up on its hind legs, as Paul Sereno concluded, after comparing the ratios of the humerus and femur circumferences in Jobaria to today's elephants. The weight distribution of Jobaria indicates that it was supported by the rear limbs rather than the forelimbs, as in elephants, and is speculated that as elephants can rear up, Jobaria would have been able to do so more easily. At 18 meters long, Jobaria was a big dinosaur, but one that lived in the same area as the predator Afrovenator, which we covered last week. The young and subadults of this sauropod may have been risked at predation by Afrovenator.
On to the habitat of this African sauropod. Jobaria lived in the current-day Niger during the Middle Jurassic period between 164 to 161 million years ago. The sediments in which it was found were originally thought to represent the Haterivian to Barremian stages of the early Cretaceous period, dating Jobaria to approximately 135 million years ago. However, reinterpretation of the sediments showed they are more likely from the Bathonian to Oxfordian stages of the Middle Age, between 164 and 161 million years ago. On to discovery. Discovered in the fall of 1997 during a 4-month expedition to the Sahara Desert led by paleontologist Dr. Paul Sereno. It was found in a mapped depth site in the Tiaron Formation of Niger. With over 95% of its skeleton preserved, it is among the most complete sauropods ever found. The genus is named after a local mythical giant beast, Jobar, whose bones some Tuaregs believe to be the fossils. The specific name, Taiguadensis, comes from the cliff of Tiguadi, the site of discovery. And lastly, popular culture. Jobaria was featured in the anime series Dinosaur King.
Okay, our first paleo news segment is extinct hippo-like creature with prehistoric vacuum. About 23 million years ago, an ancient hippo-sized mammal used its long snout like a vacuum cleaner, suctioning up food from the heavily vegetated shoreline whenever it was hungry, a new study finds. Fossils of the newfound species shows that it had a long snout and tusks. Its unique tooth and jaw structure indicated with a vegetarian, said study co-author Louis Jacobs, a vertebrate paleontologist at Southern Methodist University in Texas. Researchers named the new species Unalashkastylus tomidai. The word Unalashka translates to near the peninsula in the Aleut language of the indigenous Aleutian Island people, and stylus is Latin for column, a reference to the creature's column-shaped teeth. The species name Tomidai honors the Japanese vertebrate paleontologist Yukimitsu Tomita. O. Tomidai belongs to the order Desmostylia, the only known order of marine mammals to go completely extinct, the researchers said. Desmostylians lived between 33 million and 10 million years ago along the coastline of the North Pacific Ocean, and the new specimens showed that the order was more diverse than previously thought, said co-researcher Anthony Fiorillo, chief curator at the Puro Museum of Nature and Science in Texas. And that the source for that is Live Science. And one last thing I'd like to add, there has been one controversial Desmostylian tooth found here in Florida, which might indicate that they also existed in the Atlantic as well. It's still up in the air.
All right, then. Well, thanks, Scott, for that extra tidbit. Frankfurt, 48-million-year-old horse-like fetus was discovered. Researchers from the Stecklenburg Research Institute in Frankfurt in Germany and the Naturalistisches Museum in Basel in Switzerland have announced the discovery of a 48-million-year-old horse-like fetus. The amazingly well-preserved equid stillborn was unearthed near Frankfurt in 2000. Almost all of its bones are still intact, and with the exception of its skull, which looks to have been crushed. A team from the two institutes undertook an analysis of the bones and used scanning electronic microscopy and high-resolution micro-X-ray to get a better picture of the animal, which allowed him to determine the position at which it died. Soft tissue such as the uroplacenta, the placenta and uterus, and a uterine ligament were also well preserved, and lead author Jens Jorens Franzen of the Streckenberg Research Institute and the Naturhistorisk Museum believes this could be the earliest fossil record of the uterine system from a placental mammal. By using SEM, they found a bacterial lawn that had replaced most of the soft tissues. The fetus, which measures just about 12.5 centimeters, is thought to have died shortly before it was born, according to a study published in PLOS ONE. The source for this story comes from www.ibtimes.co.uk.
We have yet another new mammal species discovered. We've been reporting on several of these over the last several weeks. This one is no exception. Spinolestes xenarthrosis, well-preserved 125 million-year-old mammal discovered in Spain. Fossilized remains of a 125 million-year-old mammal have been discovered by researchers in Spain. The newly discovered extinct species was so well-preserved that scientists have said it pushed the earliest record of mammalian soft tissue preservation back by 60 million years. The small mammal, dubbed Spinolestes xenarthrosis, belonged to a group of mammals called Triconodon. Experts from the Autonomous University of Madrid, University of Bonn, and the University of Chicago say it was similar in appearance to an opossum and the size of a rat and weighed 50 to 70 grams. Such was the preservation of the small animal found in La Joyas that the scientists behind the discovery have said they have been able to analyze its hair structure in microscopic detail. Study co-author J. Shi Lu, PhD, professor of organismal biology and anatomy at the University of Chicago said, quote, Spinolestes is a spectacular find. It is stunning to see almost perfectly preserved skin and hair structures fossilized in microscopic detail in such an odd fossil. This Cretaceous fur ball displays the entire structural diversity of modern mammalian skin and hairs. And this comes from the same source as the previous story, www.ibtimes.co.uk.
Measurements of dinosaur body temperatures sheds light on the metabolism debate. New research by UCLA scientists indicates that some dinosaurs at least had the capacity to elevate their body temperature using heat sources in the environment, such as the sun. They also believe the animals were probably more active than modern-day alligators and crocodiles, which can be active and energetic, but only for brief spurts. The researchers also found evidence that other dinosaurs they have studied had lower body temperatures than modern birds, their only living relatives, and were probably less active. The research published today in the journal Nature Communications. Led by Robert Igler, a researcher in the Department of Earth, Planetary, and Space Sciences at UCLA College, the scientists examined fossilized dinosaur eggshells from Argentina and Mongolia. Analyzing the shell's chemistry allowed them to determine the temperature at which these eggshells form, information that had not previously been known. The source of this story comes from newsroom.ulsc.edu. And as a personal thing, this is strongly supporting the mesothermic hypothesis that dinosaurs were somewhere in the middle between warm-blooded and cold-bloodedness, or endothermy or ectothermy. And so that is a little clarification on that.
If you guys are into the movies, well, we've got 3 stories for the price of 1. Major movie news concerning Godzilla, a confirmation that Godzilla will be battling King Kong again, and also news about another movie concerning dinosaurs that will be coming out soon. And here is the stories. Our first story. Legendary and Warner Brothers announced franchise unification bringing Godzilla, King Kong, and other chaotic monsters into a single cinematic universe. Burbank County Business Wire. Following Legendary's and Warner Brothers Pictures' 2014 success with the global reinvention of the Godzilla franchise, the companies have come together to create an epic new shared cinematic franchise. All-powerful monsters, towering heroes bring new inspiration. Revealing a mythology brings Godzilla, legendary King Kong, and some other giant super species, both classic and new. Monarch, the human organization that uncovered Godzilla in the 2014 film, expanded their mission across multiple releases. The announcement that the reinvention of monsters continues was made today by legendary CEO Thomas Tull and Kevin Tsujihara, chairman and CEO of Warner Brothers. The initial trio of films are 2017's Kong Skull Island, Godzilla 2 in 2018, and the big one, Godzilla vs. Kong, arriving in theaters in 2020. While Legendary maintained its new home at Universal Pictures, the Godzilla films remain in partnership with Warner Brothers, who also now distribute Kong, and production on Kong Skull Island begins on October 19th. The story was broken on www.businesswire.com, but can also be signed on many other websites like comingsoon.net and so forth. And our next item of the world movie news is for the old nostalgia fans of the 1980s. Dino Riders is getting a movie. Dino Riders movie in the works. Mattel and Solipsist Films are teaming up to bring the 1980s animated series Dino Riders to the big screen. The franchise was created by Jerry and Carla Conway. That's the same Jerry Conway who co-created The Punisher for Marvel Comics. As with 80s animated series, Dino Riders was developed primarily as a way to get kids to buy toys, in this case produced by Tyco, which is now owned by Mattel. The series only ran for 14 episodes, but the premise is just ridiculous enough to be seen as direct competition to Hasbro's Transformers franchise. Peter Cullen, the voice of Optimus Prime, was even part of the Dino Riders' original voice cast. Alyssa Phillips and Stephen Lau Haru are producing for Solipsist and are said to be currently searching for a writer to pen the adaptation script. And this story was first broken on broken on comicbook.com, and likewise can be seen on any other website. And this one concerns another iconic Japanese kaiju, the return of the fire-breathing turtle Gamera. Word has just hit the wire that in honor of his 50th anniversary, everyone's favorite fire-breathing turtle Gamera will once again be gracing the big screen in 2015. We eagerly pray for the return of Gairon as well. According to the Anime News Network, Japanese retailer Miami is listing the summer 2014 issue of Kadokawa Shoten's Tokusatsu magazine released on May 6th. This issue will lead picture of a scoop by quote new Gamera launching, dragging along sounds, that famous Gamera planter, along with the article of its unveiling of the production. This was the Anime News Network. But the big thing was the trailer that dropped last week. And what can I say about the trailer? I loved every single minute of it. Enough said.
Okay, this week's book recommendation is a series that I'm very fond of called the West of Eden Trilogy. I see Harry Harrison. Harry Harrison is primarily known as the author of the book Make Room, which was the basis for the movie Soylent Green. It was written sometime, I believe, in the 1960s. Most of Harry Harrison's stuff is very different from the West of Eden trilogy. He wrote a lot of gritty, comedic science fiction stuff. But West of Eden was serious. And the overall tone and scope of the West of Eden trilogy is very reminiscent of the John Carter Mars series of Edgar Rice Burroughs. It has a lot of the same vibe, and if you like that kind of stuff, and say Dune, and probably The Lord of the Rings as well, I think you would like this too. The basic premise of the trilogy is that what if the asteroid that hit Chicxulub didn't happen, and that the dinosaurs didn't go extinct and survived up to the modern time? What you in Harrison's speculative scenario is a world in which the dinosaurs, pretty much as we knew them from the fossil record, have managed to hang on in warm climates, particularly in Africa and Asia. However, an ice age came, and the ones in North America were driven south into South America. As a result, mammals came to rise the way we know them post-Cretaceous, and a race of human beings evolved out of a New World monkey instead of the classic original story coming out of Africa. Essentially, the premise of the story is that you've got a race of intelligent reptilian humanoids living in Africa and Asia that are totally unaware of the mammalian humanoids living in North America. The climate is getting colder in Africa and Asia. Has made the reptilian humanoids decide to send colonies to North America with the idea of settling there, and in South America as well. The reptilian humanoids have a society based on technology created from genetic engineering, their own science of genetic engineering. I should also mention they're supposed to be evolved mosasaurs, which is one of the things about the series that I thought was a little, hinky. Most people expect if you're going to have some kind of intelligent reptilian humanoid, it's going to be something like Dale Russell's Dinosauroid, descended from Deinonychus or something like that. But anyway, these creatures, which kind of resemble the Sleek Stacks from the old Land of the Lost television series, are evolved from mosasaurs. And all their technology is grown. Like their city that they live in is grown from a tree. It's a giant tree with all these rooms and everything in it. And they've modified different animals into instruments or tools. Their guns are made out of monitor lizards that they have modified.
So it's kind of like the Flintstones in a way.
Yeah, well, sort of. But more serious. I mean, the way it's put together in the book, it really hangs together. The boats are made from squids and ichthyosaurs. They took and bred giant ichthyosaurs basically to serve as submarines. And anyway, that just gives you a general idea of what's going on here. Well, anyway, the story really gets relevant when the Yolani, which are the reptilian humanoids, arrive in North America and discover the Tanu, which are the humanoid primates, and immediately they start fighting with each other because they're totally, don't understand each other. And in the course of this, one of the primate boys named Carrick abducted by the reptilians and took back to their civilization. And he's basically raised by 12 or 13 years until he's grown and eventually escapes and goes back to his people. But he's kind of like, the interesting thing about him is that he's lived in both worlds. Kind of like Dustin Hoffman's character in Little Big Man. He's got one foot in both societies and can understand both of them. And he makes for an interesting protagonist. Basically, without ruining it, the whole story, it evolves into wars between the two cultures and, all sorts of intrigue spread out over 3 sprawling books. And I highly recommend this series. Very well done. Both cultures have their own language. And fortunately for the readers in the book, most of the dialogue is in standard English. But you do get bits and spatterings of the words from both languages and cultures. The reptiles have a matriarchal culture where the males are subservient to the females, and all the females are like Amazon warrior types, militaristic, their society is. And like I said, it's a very interesting story, and very much got a vibe like the John Carter series, with the reptilian humanoids kind of reminding you of the Tharks in the Mars series. So these 3 books were written in 1984, 1986, and 1988. Would make wonderful films. So that's about all I can say, but I highly recommend the series.
Alright then, thank you Scott for the review. For this week's Paleofauna of the Week, we have Unityrotherium. The dimensions of this mammal was a length of about 4 meters or 13 feet, height of 1.7 meters or 5.6 feet, and it weighed up to 2 metric tons or about 2 short tons. Unityrotherium was part of the Doacerata order of plant-eating rhinoceros-like hooved creatures famous for their paired horns and tusk-like canine teeth. How Dinoceratans are related to other mammals is in dispute. They are probably part of the hooved mammal Ungulate group and have similarities with some South American hooved mammals, namely the primitive Caradoia of Paleocene South America. Paleobiology, they were similar to today's rhinos in both size and shape, although they are not closely related. Its legs were robust to sustain the weight of the animal and were equipped with claws. Moreover, unlike rhinos today, the sternum was made up of segments of Unipter's horizontal plates and compressed in vertical segments. As with other early mammals of the Eocene epoch, Unityrotherium didn't exactly excel in the intelligence department, with an unusually small brain compared to the rest of its bulky body. Its most unusual feature was the skull, which is both large and strongly built, but simultaneously flat and concave. This feature is rare and not a regular characteristic of any other known mammal except in some brontotheres. The upper large canine teeth might have served as formidable defensive weapons and superficially resembled those of saber-toothed cats. Sexual dimorphic, the teeth were larger in males than in females. However, they also might have used them to pluck the aquatic plants from the marshes that they seem to comprise their diet. The skulls of the males bore 6 prominent knob-like ossicones that grew from the frontal region of the skull. The function of these structures is unknown. They may have been used of defense and or sexual display. Unitarian went extinct around 37 million years ago, presumably due to climate change and competition with perissodactyls such as brontopterygians and rhinos. The 2 species are currently recognized from the United States during the early to middle Eocene and one from middle to late Eocene in China. And now time for the Paleobits segment. Unlike what is depicted in Jurassic Park and other media, theropod dinosaurs were unable to prognate their hands or twist their hands, their forearms, kind of like how you would twist your hands to face downward or upwards. This meant that their palms always faced inwards, kind of like how a bird moves its wings. They're not able to twist their arms, and this is because of how their radius and ulna are structured and connected to their humerus or their upper arm bone. So, do you have anything you'd like to add to that, Greg?
Trey the Explainer of YouTube fame explained more about this on his latest video about the scientific inaccuracies in the movie trailer for Pixar's upcoming The Good Dinosaur movie. In case you guys wanted to get more of a technical explanation as to why dinosaur hands are that way they are. He explained as that there's a certain type of bone in their wrists that prevented them from flexing it in the same manner as a human. Chevron bone, I believe is what he referred to as. I
believe so too, but for more information, we do recommend that you go to Trey the Explainer's video on YouTube.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we've got ourselves another exciting prehistoric fight in your hands, the Battle of the Super Crocs, have previously been featured in both Paleofauna Week and, in the case of Dinosuchus, in no less than 2 fights already. Previously scoring off against the giant Mosasaurus and Tyrannosaurus Rex. Here tonight is facing perhaps its most closest and equal challenge. The giant came into the Miocene Purosaurus, who was making his first debut in the death battle in the prehistoric matchup tourney today.
In this corner, we have Deinosuchus. Dimensions: largest adults, measuring 10.6 meters to 35 feet in total length. Classification: classified within a basal position within the clade Alligatoroidea. Paleobiology: a 2014 study suggested that it would have been able to perform a death roll like modern crocodile. Schwimmer concluded in 2002 that the feeding patterns of Deinosuchus most likely varied by geographic location. The smaller Deinosuchus specimens of eastern North America would have been opportunistic feeders in an ecological niche similar to that of the modern American alligator that would have consumed marine turtles, large fish, and smaller dinosaurs. The bigger but less common Deinosuchus that lived in Texas and Montana might have been more specialized hunters capturing and eating large dinosaurs. Habitat: lived 80 to 73 million years ago. Deinosuchus was present on both sides of the western interior seaway. Specimens have been found in 10 of the modern-day United States.
In the other corner, we have the giant from Miocene-era South America, Purosaurus brasiliensis. The dimensions: the estimated skull length for one large type species, P. brasiliensis, is 55 inches long, or 1,400 millimeters. Paleontologists estimate that P. brasiliensis reached around 12.5 meters, or 41 feet in length, weighing around 8.4 metric tons with a daily food intake of 40.6 kilograms. In classification, it is an extinct genus of giant caiman. Paleobiology: bite force has been estimated to be around 69,000 newtons, or 7 metric tons of force. That's stronger than Tyrannosaurus Rex, folks. The large size and estimated strength of this animal appears to have allowed it to include a wide range of prey in its diet, making it an apex predator ecosystem. As an adult, it would have preyed upon large to very large vertebrates with no real competition from sympatric small carnivores. Researchers have proposed that the large size of Purosaurus, though offering many advantages, may have also mobility. The constant changing environments on a large geological scale may have reduced its long-term survival, favoring smaller species more resilient to ecological shifts. And Purosaurus is one of the largest known crocodiliforms ever to have existed. 3 other extinct crocodiliforms, Sarcosuchus, Deinosuchus, and Rhamphasuchus, had similar body sizes. They lived during the Miocene epoch around 8 million years ago. And like with Deinosuchus, this guy was too fully capable of doing the death roll maneuver.
Okay, I'm going to go with Purosaurus because it looks to me like it was a little bit larger and heavier than Deinosuchus, which I think would probably give it an advantage.
True, it was a bit more robust, but especially in the skull. that massive skull would be great for gripping a hold of prey, and I would also suspect that, I don't know if this is possible, but it could probably use that thing as a battering ram.
Yeah, what was that weird bumpy snout all about?
Do
they have any ideas, theories?
From what I've read, some have speculated that it to hold a lot of the massive muscles in its skull for bite force and whatnot. Some believe it is a sexual characteristic. I think even one scientist has mentioned the battering ram idea. What do you think, Greg?
I haven't really read into or seen much about why Purosaurus had a really strange shaped snout, to say the least. But for getting into Deinosuchus here, its bite force is nothing to sneeze at either. Its bite force was estimated to be around 18,000 to 102,803 newtons, or 23,100 pounds of force. So as a biter, it was just about equal in Purosaurus in that department. In terms of who's going to outbite the other, that's a tie, easily.
I would have to agree. It would be a tie in terms of bite force. However...
Well, given these odds, I think the only thing I can use to come down on one side or the other is the fact that Purosaurus seems to be a little bit bigger than Deinosuchus.
Yeah, and like I said, that unusually...
No.
With their jaw shapes, too, it would seem that Purosaurus' jaws were kind of like that of a bulldog's in a way, meant to not only just to crush, but also to hold on to something. While Deinosuchus has more of that typical alligator-like snout. So, which were great for gripping and holding, but when you have something that's specially made for gripping and holding, he kind of outdoes the other, in my opinion. So, but other than that, though, I think it is a matter of just who can take the first bite that is lethal.
I don't know what. This one's a toss-up, honestly. Yeah, there were some Deinosuchus individuals that could have been in the 40-foot size range, particularly the individuals of the Deinosuchus riograndensis genus, which was the one found in the western half of the United States. But I would put Purosaurus to be, on average, larger, at up to maybe 43 feet.
So we're going to call this one going towards Purosaurus.
That's my choice, but you guys may have a different opinion.
I'm siding with you
probably
on that.
favoring Purosaurus by virtue of having bigger, larger size, comparable bite force, among other things. But Deinosuchus could also win. This also depends on individual animals here. Which animal's bigger? Which one's more experienced? Just like our Tarbosaurus Eutectorus fight, this is a very close fight where it comes down to individual, X factors.
True to that. So, overall, we would say a slim margin goes to Purosaurus, but anything can happen. And so, to all of our viewers and listeners, we recommend that you type in your own suggestions of who you think would win this fight in our comment section on our Facebook page, on our DeviantArt page, and in our comment section on YouTube. And I think that concludes tonight's broadcast. What do y'all think? So... Also, please support the show at our Patreon page. Just go to patreon.com. And thanks again, and have a good night, everyone.